Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, May 21st, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the GOP's split idea on how they should prioritize their message moving forward, what they should actually do in order to win future elections, and why this is really important to see, and it puts many things into perspective for the GOP. Now, we know that the Republican Party has been pushing the big lie, the lie that the 2020 presidential election was rigged. Nearly the 70 to 80% of their own GOP constituents have seen a number as low as 55 to 60%, but the average hovers around 70 to 80. In terms of the amount of Republicans, percentage-wise, that believe the 2020 election was stolen from President Trump, that Joe Biden and the Democratic Party committed voter fraud in order to win the election. Why? Largely because President Trump claimed this and continues and perpetuates this lie that the election was rigged, and this is ingrained in the minds of many Republican voters and is sticking with them, as we now see. And looking at the election result, it's not even as if Joe Biden won in a landslide. He won the popular vote by 5 points. Yes, that is a large amount, but only won 306 electoral votes in the Electoral College. Joe Biden only flipped the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nebraska's 2nd District. The interesting thing is, when Joe Biden was first on the ballot back in 2008, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nebraska's 2nd District all went towards the Democratic Party. So, the only thing that was necessarily new to the Democrats in this election was Arizona and Georgia. Beyond that, there was nothing outside of the realm of possibility given the recent elections in the 21st century. Besides that, the GOP still continues to lie about this and is now pushing for efforts to change the voting systems in a number of states. And this CBS News poll reveals that this is not something that will lose them support amongst the Republican Party. In fact, is a moderately popular position amongst Republicans. We're going to get into the states that are trying to make it harder, more difficult for groups of people to vote and making it more of an issue. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Let's see what's actually happening here. Why am I covering this one question out of a poll that was mainly to do with Liz Cheney as a Republican? Well, when I saw this question, I was pretty alarmed when I saw the results. I was looking at it and it says that the Republican strategy for winning elections should prioritize, and then it gave voters, Republicans, two options. Either working on their message to get more voters with policies and ideas, the standard type of campaign response, or push for rule changes that will change state voting rules. Essentially, 47% of Republicans believe that the GOP already has enough voters, but they should change the state voting rules. That is alarming. Why is it alarming? Well, the Republican Party has not won the popular vote since 2004. They have not won the popular vote. Before then, it was 88. Looking at the election results in the 21st century, we started off with the popular vote winner, Al Gore, losing the election. Then George W. Bush does win the popular vote. Obama wins it in 08. Obama wins it in 2012. Clinton wins it in 16. Biden wins it in 20. Yet somehow, we've had 2 extra terms of a Republican president, contrary to the popular vote. So where are these enough voters coming from? Or are they saying that there are enough voters to get out there and that they just need to prevent the ones that are turning out to vote from voting again? Well, I think that what I just said is exactly what is going through the minds of many Republicans. At the end of the day, these voter laws that are making it more difficult for people to vote are disproportionately targeting minority and low-income citizens. That's how it is. There is no evidence that the 2020 election was rigged, and I have been very clear on this channel that I will not entertain such a preposterous lie. That the election was rigged, that an election that I covered for 3 years somehow had mass rigging on a mass level to a point where Donald Trump is trying to claim that everyone up to Mike Pence is working against him, rather than admit the election loss, rather than admit that Georgia legally went towards the Democrats. Because you know what that did as well? It also made Georgia blue on the Senate level. Because President Trump continued these claims, voters here turned away from Kelly Loeffler, turned away from David Perdue. And some on the right wing would like to say this is because they didn't back Trump enough. Well, go ahead and watch some of their rallies. Go ahead and look at what they did. They wholeheartedly accepted President Trump's endorsement. Kelly Loeffler had a 100% Trump voting record. You did not find a single senator more pro-Trump than Kelly Loeffler. It's as if she went on his Twitter page right before the vote and decided then and there. And that's probably what she did whenever she does or did end up voting. But at the end of the day, these two Georgia Senate seats were pure products of President Trump's claims of election fraud. And now we are looking at the GOP in a position where the majority of them say we should just get more voters with policies and ideas. Conservatism won me over in the past. Why can't it win over some of these more independent voters? The other half are saying, wait a second, we have enough voters. I don't know why they think they have enough voters, but they're saying we have enough voters. Why don't we just change the state voting rules? And that's exactly what the Republican Party is doing. Look at all of these red dots. Each one of these red dots are restrictive voting bills that have been proposed following the 2020 election. And the red dots are states, are bills that have been nominated by the Republican Party. In some states, you see some restrictive voting bills by Democrats, but 90% of them come from the GOP. And if you're looking at the states where you could actually see so many restrictive voting measures, look at them. There's a reason why Georgia, Arizona have absurd amounts of voting laws being considered. It makes sense because it's a state that, two states that just went to the Democrats for the first time since the 90s, but it's very clear what the efforts are. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. You're looking at Wisconsin with 10 possible voting bills. You're looking at Michigan with 21 possible voting bills. You're looking at Pennsylvania with 15. You're looking at Arizona with 26. The sheer amount of bills alone is insanely alarming. And it's all following the 2020 election and how they want to enact different pieces of legislation to ensure that this state never goes blue again. And that's exactly what's being hinted at here, or being directly stated. Pushing for changes in state voting rules, they know what they are trying to say. It is very clear what the intention is. So there isn't this argument that, pushing for restrictive voting efforts might peel away some of those Republican voters. If anything, it'll inspire Democrats or move over some independents. But amongst Republicans, this is certainly not a widely unpopular point of view. In fact, it's one that many Republicans, 47% of them, say should be the, next step. It's not winning over through conservative policies. It's not winning over through ads. It's winning over or restricting certain voters to allow Republicans to vote at a higher level. And we can actually see this in full effect. FiveThirtyEight released this article a few days ago where they actually took a look at, depending on how difficult it is to state. So they put the cost of voting index. So if a state has no voter ID law and no main restrictions on voting, then it's easier to vote. If you have a state where you need 2 voter IDs, which we now see being enacted in certain states, I believe Georgia is the most recent one where you need 2 voter IDs to vote by mail, it's going to be more difficult to vote. And if you look at the level here between the states that are easier to vote in and the higher turnout, and the level of turnout, you'll notice that in almost all of the states where it's easier to vote, the turnout is much higher. And you can see it in every single election since 1996. The easier it is to vote, the turnout is higher. That's easy to comprehend. I'm sure you all completely understand that because it makes sense. It makes sense. But the thing is, the Republican Party has yet to win a major election through high turnout elections. 2020, the highest turnout we've seen since 1900 in over 100 years. And I say 1900, not referring to that entire 100-year period. No, I mean the election of 1900. 67% turnout is absolutely, it's great. I think it's great to have high turnout because I like the fact that more Americans are voting. But the major point of reality is that the Republican Party has yet to win a major election when you're talking about high turnout. Look at 2010 and 2014. Compare that to the turnout of 2018. Whenever Democrats need to win, the turnout needs to be considerably higher than it was in the previous election. Or if they want to continue victories, they need to make sure that the turnout remains high. Generally speaking, when turnout is high, the Democratic Party does better. 2020 was sort of conflicting on that, but as we now look at the election data, not as much. Because the Democrats still won a trifecta. Yes, they suffered major losses, I would say, on the statewide level, but I will also point out the fact that, yes, the Democratic Party still was able to do well. Winning a presidential election is doing well. I will acknowledge that they had major missteps and major faults in the 2020 election, but I'm not going to take away from the presidential election victory. But with the Republican Party conflicted as to how they should move forward, with 47% of them saying that we should change the state voting rules, it reminds me of this Georgia law. Do you remember it? It was covered by CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all of the media networks, because it was a very big law. It was one that was characterized under CNN and other news sources as voting rights under attack. And if you look at some of the provisions, they certainly were disproportionately targeting minority voters. Let me use an example in the state of Georgia, for instance, with one of these new efforts that was put in the state of Georgia. Well, it is now criminal to hand out water or food in a polling place. It doesn't matter how long the line is, you can't pass out food and water. And at the regular level, you would say, well, if you're passing out water bottles that say vote for Biden, well, that makes sense. But that's not what's happening here. What's happening in this state, what's happening in Georgia specifically, is they're making it more difficult for certain groups to vote. Let's say Fulton County, for example. Fulton County probably has a lot more voting centers, but still a lot more people, considerably a lot more people than, let's say Gilmer County. For example, I chose a random county right up in northern Georgia. So you're looking at Fulton County and you're saying, wow, there are 500,000 votes here, and some of these lines at the polling places are 5-6 hours long. And yes, I'm not over-exaggerating. There are voters that voted in Georgia that waited 5 to 6 hours to vote. And as we see by that margin, every single vote mattered. So when you're in line for 5 to 6 hours and someone has a water bottle, in a normal election before this bill was passed, they could hand it to you. I can tell you now, nobody is changing their minds because someone gave them a water bottle. If you went in with the intention of voting for President Trump or Vice President Biden at the time, you are going to remain that way, regardless if your thirst was quenched. So this law literally is going to target these groups, because if these polling places don't have an abundant source of water bottles or food and people are waiting for 5 to 6 hours, some of them might crack. Some of them might say, this is too long of a wait. I'm just one vote and I'm just going to leave. Well, that times 10,000 times 20,000 can certainly, change the outcome of a race. And that's exactly what could have happened in Georgia had this voting law been implemented. In addition, it is harder to vote by mail in Georgia, which means counties like Fulton County are going to see increased lines. The lines were exceptionally long even when the majority of the state had voted by mail. So when you're looking at Fulton County, or the majority of the county had voted by mail, so when you're looking at Fulton County and you still saw 5 to 6 hour lines, what does this mean for a non-vote by mail election? Well, couldn't voters just vote by mail the same way they did before? The answer is no. It has become more difficult, which means county like Pickens County or like Gilmer County that have smaller populations, more rural populations with maybe less voting centers, but they are going to see smaller lines. They're going to see easier access to vote because they have the ability to get out there and wait. Sometimes these people in Fulton County are on their lunch break wanting to go vote, and they won't have 5-6 hours. When you're talking about someone who's trying to barely make it by, living paycheck to paycheck, they are not going to take off their entire day. It's not a national holiday, so they're not going to take off their entire work day when they could be making, $100 in the day to go vote, because they need that $100 more than someone else does. And while that one vote may seem it's inconsequential, it's one vote, this happens on a very large scale. So when I'm looking at these red dots here, what I want to say is this one Georgia law is just one dot out of over 100. This one Georgia law is 1 out of over 100. And it's not something that is unpopular within the GOP. I thought this was something that the state legislature seemed to be out of touch within the GOP. I honestly did not expect this many Republicans to say that the voting rules should be changed significantly, and that's what the strategy for winning elections should prioritize. The easy answer was there. The answer to just get more voters with policies and ideas, but that's not the one that the 47% chose. They saw the change voting laws and went with it largely because of these lies that the 2020 election was rigged. And it disproportionately affects minority voters. When they close down the amount of early voting sites, when they turn off, going to the polls on Sunday out of respect for the Catholic Church or out of the respect for the Christian religion. I mean, the excuses they use to prevent minority voters from voting is astounding. You want to know why they got rid of Sundays in certain, or why they're proposing to get rid of Sundays in certain states? I mean, you're looking at, get out to the polls effort from churches. So when they meet on Sunday, they go to mass, and then they end up going to vote. Well, if you take away Sundays, that's not going to happen. And this is a strategy that was largely used by black churches. I think that the intent is there. Looking at some of these efforts, the only people it just so happens to be impacting are those in the Atlanta metro area. Or in some of these laws being proposed, the only people that it seems to be impacting are those in Phoenix. The only people that it seems to be impacting are those in Detroit. And they all have something in common. These are major Democratic areas, and the Republican Party seems to be very clear in this effort that they want to make it more restrictive out of the idea of election security. But with no proof that the election was rigged, they still have endless control as to what they do in the states as it stands. Because the Democrats dropped the ball in state legislature races, in governor's races, the Republicans have free reign in many of these states. They have the ability to do what they want and when they want. And that starts with Georgia, but it certainly does not end there. As CNN says, it's an attack on voting rights. And while I understand many of you guys may not view CNN as an unpartisan resource, or you may not view me personally, but I am going to be honest. These efforts are disproportionately affecting minority voters. I don't care if it's proposed by a Democrat or a Republican, but the fact remains 90% of these bills being proposed are by the Republican Party. And this one Georgia voting bill is a glimpse into how the next year and a half will go. In preparation for the 2022 midterm elections, the Republican Party is going to ensure that an election like 2020 never occurs again. But with no evidence of voter fraud, I find it to be very, very worrisome for those who already found it difficult to vote in the first place. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2020 post-2020 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.